Hello there folks, welcome back to the Chap's Guide. My name is Ash and I am your host on this journey through men's style, self-development and personal grooming. Now, as you know, I always encourage you guys to throw a question into me. Maybe you're looking for my observations, my views, my thoughts. You want to tap into my life experience. And to do so, sometimes it means exposing something of my soul to you in the way which I answer these questions. And today's question really falls into that category, where I've got to tell you something about my backstory in order to maybe fully, adequately answer the question. So I'm going to give you this question. It's from Daniel, who says, this is a personal question, so I hope it doesn't come across as rude. I'm asking, as you did mention something like this vaguely in one of your videos, and I was wondering about it. What was the hardest period in your life in terms of struggling, and how did you get past it and get through it? Now that is a great question, because let's be honest, we all go through difficult periods in life. I often use the term, life is a series of peaks and troughs, never on a straight continuum. Wouldn't that be great if life was just one straight line? But it is troughs and peaks, and that's what you come to expect. And the secret to life is getting through those troughs, isn't it? It's about being a solver of those problems rather than just let the problem overwhelm you. And in answering this question, I'm going to tell you about a period of my life which I look back upon now and realise I was tested by what life had thrown at me. Now, I will go on the record here and say I haven't had my hardest tests in life as yet. I haven't personally experienced great grief or great sadness. You know, my parents are both still alive. I've never lost anybody through death who was extremely close to me. So I acknowledge that what I'm going to talk about may seem trivial if you yourself have been tested by the experience of grief, which I full know, being a mental well-being field training officer for a charity, is most likely the most challenging of all obstacles in life to get through. So this is not that bad, but it's something which took me to the extremities of my ability to cope at the time. And in answering your question, I've broken it down into a few areas, but I'm hoping to strike a balance really with honesty, reflection, and also inspiration for you. Give you some actionable tips that I've drawn from this experience as I go along. So, first of all, I want to acknowledge it's a great question, Daniel, and thank you for asking. Deep question. Thank you for having the courage to ask it of me, because sometimes when we are chatting to people and we know maybe they have a story to tell, we are reluctant to pose the question. So I'm so pleased you did. And it made me sit down and play out a bit of introspection with myself and think about how I grew from this period of my life. So let me tell you about, up to this point, one of the hardest periods of my life. I'm going to take you back to 1996, it was actually. In 1996, I was a 26-year-old man, and I was living the high life. I was serving in the Royal Air Force, and I was based at the Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, which is in a place called Mons, which is about 20 miles south of the capital city of Belgium, Brussels. And I was living on a multinational camp. I was single. I had a girlfriend, but not who was in Belgium with me. So I was enjoying what you would describe a playboy lifestyle. I was a very heavy drinker. I threw myself into the social life which comes with the military world. And now I look back, in hindsight, I realise I was probably a problematic drinker. I drank way too much, but it was just part of the lifestyle I was living. It was a tax-free lifestyle, because when you're in a situation like that, you get kind of sort of pseudo diplomatic status as a military guy. I had a tax-free sports car. I was living the big life. I lived in the block. All of my income was beer money. And that's exactly what I spent it on. So I was living this wonderful life. But in the mid-90s, the Berlin Wall had come down in 1989. I'd been in Germany at the time. And the British military was taking full advantage of this thing that they called the peace dividend. Because the Soviet Union had obviously dissolved, there was no thought that there would ever be conflict in Europe again for quite some time. So we divested ourselves of all of the money which we'd spent on our armed forces over the years. The Royal Air Force, incidentally, when I joined it, had 100,000 people in it. When I left, it had about 50,000. Right now, this minute, I believe it's about 28, 29,000. So they were really downsizing. Opportunities were disappearing fast. And I'd spent more than half of my 10 years of service abroad and loved it. And I probably would have wanted to have gone on somewhere else overseas from Belgium. You know, I had my eye on Cyprus or somewhere like that. But it dawned on me, this was all coming to an end. I was 26. I didn't own a thing in the world except my tax-free sports car, which I was probably paying off over a long period of time. And I decided, Ash, you need to get sensible. Let's pack this job in. Let's find something else. Go back to the UK, settle down some roots, and actually live like an adult instead of an inflated teenager, which was the life I was leading. Marvellous as it was, I have to say. If I could go back and live that life for another 12 months, I would. But, you know, year on year, it kind of loses its lustre. And I decided it was time to leave the Royal Air Force and start again. So I contacted, and you know, the natural thoughts which many guys in my position find themselves, you think to yourself, what can I do when I leave? I went through the usual sort of rigmarole. Tried the armed forces, from the armed forces to the emergency services, which is often a route many guys take. My first thought, the police service, right? Law enforcement. I didn't know anybody in my family who'd worked in that industry, but to me it seemed like a job which was respected, sort of well paid, came with good pension benefits, and it seemed like a natural transition that would fit nicely for me. And back in the days I'm talking about, the mid-90s, not like recent years where the British Police Service cannot recruit people into it because they don't pay so well. It's a very woke business these days. You know, it's not much fun to be a part of. Back then, it was still quite a respected profession. It was paid quite well. And for me, it seemed like a very good opportunity. So I contacted several police forces. I went along, did the aptitude tests, the physical fitness tests. And sure enough, very quickly, I was offered an opportunity with a police force in Wales, where I came from originally. And I thought, great, this is an opportunity for me to go home into a job where I can, you know, still have a full career in front of me. Even though I had 10 years of military service behind me, the pension benefits would carry across as well. That was a key thing that was very fortunate in my life. But that's a route I was going to take. Got the job offer. I asked if I could leave the RAF, and basically they said, no, you can't. They just made thousands and thousands of people redundant. They'd let them go, involuntarily separated. I hadn't been selected for, you know, redundancy, involuntary separation. So they said, sorry, we've let too many people go. You're going to have to stay. And your contract states you have to stay for 12 months, and then we'll let you go. I was on a 12-year fixed contract with them at that time, and I wanted to leave at the 10-year point. So basically, they made me stay for 12 months, which was a great year, incidentally, because I really let rip that last year. I thought, well, if you're messing me around, I have no career ambitions. I am going to enjoy myself. My year of my life between 25 and 26 probably goes down as the biggest year of debauchery and enjoyment that I've ever had in my life. But you know, it had to come to an end. So I left. And it was a sad time for me because the military had been my lifetime career choice. I'd always wanted to join the armed forces. My father had been a soldier. My family has history going back to the Boer War of serving in uniform for the country in wartime, you know, in conflict. And I thought it would be my job for life. And you'd have to drag me out kicking and screaming. But here I was, the world was changing. Military was getting a lot smaller. My opportunities had diminished to virtually nothing. And I decided it was time to go. And still it was this massive wrench because it's all I'd ever known. I joined as a child. You know, I was 17 and here I was, 27 eventually, leaving after all I'd known as an adult, actually military service. And my actual separation was a sad one as well because I left from overseas. I just packed up my kit, drove back to the UK, went back to the only home I had here in the UK, which was with my parents in Wales. Stayed with them for, I think I had a month terminal leave. Then I went to the RAF administrative headquarters at RAF Innsworth in Gloucestershire to hand in, my identity card, sign the separation paperwork. And I remember vividly, I'd had a good career, a good 10 years, and I'd enjoyed it. But the last act that I had to do was sit down with a corporal from the admin department, sign a form, hand over my paperwork, and she said, well, there you go, young man, thanks very much, off you go, good luck. And that's all the thanks you get as you're leaving. So yeah, it was, I kind of feel I went out with a whimper. So now I was left, I reapproached the police service who had offered me a job, and I said to them, look, you offered me a job a year ago. I had told them at the time I couldn't take up the job because I was being forced to stay much longer than I'd anticipated in my severance of my contract. And they were really angry. They wrote back to me and said, you shouldn't have accepted the job if you didn't have a date of leaving the military. And I said, well, I couldn't, I can't, I thought I could leave within a short period of time, weeks even. I had no idea this was going to happen. They were letting people go hand over fist prior to me asking, and then they'd realised they'd let too many people go. So the police service I was joining said, well, sorry, your opportunity with us has lapsed, but contact us when you leave and perhaps we can sort something out. So I actually left on a bit of a 50-50 thinking, will I get back in with them? Will I not? I'm not going to know unless I try. So I swallowed my pride, got out and wrote to them and said, and I say wrote to them because that's what we did back then. There were no emails. I wrote to them and said, I'm available. Can I come back? Or can I have that opportunity? And they said, maybe. We're full up this year. We're going to just see what happens. We'll contact you if anything becomes apparent, but do not take this as an acceptance. You've got to carry on with your life, and if something comes up, we'll contact you. And this was a bit of a blow. But I thought to myself, do you know what? I got that job pretty quickly. There are 45 police forces in the UK, spread throughout the country. If this one don't pan out, there'll be something else coming along. Or even this force again will open their doors for recruitment in another year. I got in once, I can get in again. So I was kind of upbeat about it. But then, I'm back to the logistical situation. I'm living with my parents. I'm a 27-year-old guy who had just come back from living years abroad, a playboy lifestyle, plenty of money, good paid job, and nothing to spend that money on. And all of a sudden, I'm back in a single bed, in a bedroom in my parents' house, abiding by their rules, and thinking, Christ, where's this going? So I started going to the job centre 3 times a day. I thought, I've got to get a job. I need money to live. This suddenly dawned on me. And I found a job fairly quickly working as a warehouse hand in a large factory which manufactured cables. So it was a huge international company, hundreds of people employed in this factory, and they made, telephone cables and things like that, huge, thick cables. Quite a complex process, and my job was working in the warehouse side of it, sort of storing cables, getting cable out for when it needed to go somewhere, operating various machines and the like. And it was a real thump down to earth, I gotta say, because I'd gone from my job in the military was working on ground crew, so I used to do things like refuel aircraft, fighter jets worth tens of millions of pounds, and I found myself working in a factory full of guys who was a little bit above minimum wage, but it was simply doing the most mundane tasks. And I had these much older men. This factory was full of much older men who'd never been away from this town in which they were from in their lives. Very limited, closed minds, very small outlook of the world, never worked for most of their cases anywhere other than this factory. And I remember being told by one of them, you want to buckle down, young man, because if you put your back into it, at some point, you're going to be able to drive the forklift truck. And then, the world is your oyster. You can have an easier day of work because instead of physically manual handling things, you're going to be a forklift truck driver. I didn't tell the guy that, I had full accreditation to drive forklift trucks. In fact, in my military career, I'd driven, four-wheel drive articulated forklift trucks in the field when the aircraft I worked on, the Harrier jump jets, operated from the woodlands of Germany as a makeshift airway. And, I seemed so far removed from what I had been doing at an earlier phase of my life. Much less responsibility, not a very good outlook. My social life was pretty naff. I used to sit in the restroom with these other guys in our break periods, and they would talk about football and drinking on the weekend and maybe going fishing. And my life prior to that had been, dashing around Europe, going to Brussels for the afternoon, going to the cinema, going to nightclubs, maybe driving to other capital cities, Berlin for the weekend, things like that. And here I was, my life was shit. And I was working shifts as well. So you'd work a week of days, a week of afternoons, so 2 till 10, and a week of nights, 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. And I vividly remember, and there was no ticket out of this, I thought to myself, those police aren't coming knocking anytime soon. How long am I going to have to stick this out for? And I remember one night shift, driving around in this cathedral-sized factory, looking in a sort of little pickup truck thing, trying to find some cabling which had been ordered. I had to drag it out to fill an order. And it was all dark in these long sort of corridors full of logistical stuff. And it all hit me. I thought my life has gone from exciting, interesting, flamboyant, surrounded by interesting people, doing interesting things, possibly I could have even had a future in the military if I'd stuck it out. But here I was, doing some crappy job in a factory, and the future looked bleak. And I'm not ashamed to say, I started to slip into depression, and on that particular night shift, I parked up and I cried. I sat on my vehicle that I was driving, this sort of pickup trucky thing, forklift truck, and, I shed tears. And I thought, where's this going? What does the future hold for me? I was totally frustrated, totally stuck in this small town mentality again that I thought I'd escaped when I was younger. And I realised how far I'd fallen, what life now was like. And it was a really tough time. I started to suffer with sort of psychosomatic illnesses. I felt I was ill all the time, and it was depression settling in. And I didn't realise that. I'd never suffered with that in my life up to that point. And something dawned on me. There came a point where I realised there was only one way I was going to get out of this. I was only going to be rescued by one person, and it was me. I had to pull myself up by the bootstraps and get out of this trough. I wanted a peak in my life. I didn't want to be stuck in a trough. And I thought there were 3 possible outcomes. Outcome number 1, the least desirable, rejoin the Royal Air Force, go back to what I was doing, bite down on the humble pie and go back to something that I thought I'd put behind me and try and recover it. I didn't really want to do that. I didn't even know if they'd have me. The next thing I could do, get used to this life. I am not better or worse than anybody else on this planet. None of those men in that restroom were better or worse than me as a human being. The only thing was they'd had less opportunities or they'd taken less chances as I did. But, they were happy with their lives. I could have done that. I could have just put my head down and got on with it. I could have done what everybody else did. Gone to the pub every Friday and Saturday night, played a bit of darts, married a local girl, had a couple of kids, and be satisfied with the ordinary life. Or, number 3, the route which I took, decide to move forwards with my life. Stop looking back. Stop looking at what was in the rear mirror. Couldn't go back there. Couldn't do it again. Lived it, did it. Only one way forwards. And that is what I decided to do. So, racked with a little bit of depression, racked with the thought of, what's the future holding for me, lost interest in life. I used to come home from work, often when I was on things like afternoons. I'd come home at 10 o'clock at night, go straight to bed. I would get up, go straight to work. My life existed around this crummy job, which I didn't enjoy doing, which didn't challenge me, which didn't provoke me, give me any interest at all. I was just existing, and I really had fallen into a slump. And I decided to to rescue myself from that. I looked around at local options, and it was a pretty sparse lot, to be honest with you. And one of the things I did, yes, have the hope that the police would ring me at some point and they would come to me and offer me the position which I had tried for. But there was no guarantee of that, none at all, in fact. In fact, I'd kind of settled in my mind it wasn't going to happen. So I looked around and I realised that there was a large aviation company about 20 miles near the capital city of Wales, Cardiff. General Electric it was, don't even know if it's still there now, but they serviced aircraft engines. And I thought, well, I'd served in the Royal Air Force, it's a natural fit, maybe that's somewhere I could go to work. Now, I'm not a techie, I wasn't somebody who worked on the engines, I worked on the support services, like refuelling, things like that, operating machinery. But it was worth a try. So I rang the factory. I rang this huge company which employed thousands of people, and I said, how do you get to work for you? And they said, well, we don't directly employ people, we go through an agency. This is the agency's name. I rang that agency up. They said, yeah, we're always kind of, looking out for people. The point is, I had to be really proactive about this. It didn't land at my feet. I had to work for it. I had to make calls, do a little bit of investigation. And I rang the agency, as I say, and they said, come down for an interview. I went down for an interview. They made me do a sort of aptitude test. Then they put me through an interview with a couple of managers. And they said, yeah, you're the sort of guy we're looking for. And sure enough, they offered me a job. And it started to lift me. I went back to the crummy job I was doing. I went to see the foreman, who was always asking me, whether I wanted to work overtime, and I always declined because I had no interest in it. And I got the sense he didn't like me because of that. And I went to him and I said, look, buddy, just to make you aware, I'm moving on. I've been offered a job somewhere else. And, I kind of settled my score with him at that point, but I went back to work. And then one afternoon, a few days later, literally 1 or 2 days later, I was working away in the factory, doing something in the warehouse, and a tannoy came over the sort of internal PA system in the factory, and it said, Ashley Jones, go to a phone. I went to one of the phones, and somebody at the front office had said, your father has just come into the factory, he wants to speak to you. Now, as you can imagine, I was terrified. My father had come to the factory and asked if he could speak to me. This is not the normal procedure in the workplace. And I thought something terrible has happened. My mother, I only have a mother and father. I thought, something's happened to my mother. So I rushed to the front of the factory, and there was my dad. And he called me over. And he said, listen, I wanted to come down and tell you straight away. And my heart was in my mouth. And he said, I had a phone call this morning. It's from the police. They've got a job for you. They want you to start in 2 weeks. Somebody's dropped out of one of the training courses and they need an answer by the end of the day, because if you don't say yes, they've got other people to ring. So I said, yeah, give me the phone number. I rang him up there and then. This is a day before mobile phones, of course, before email. It was all done in a very slow, laborious manner then. Hard to believe now, I know. But I rang him up and said, I'm in. I'll be there in 2 weeks. I'm fit. I've kept myself in shape. I lied. I said, I'm ready to go. And that afternoon I went to see the boss and I said, boss, I'm clocking out today. Thanks very much. But, an opportunity's come up, which I can't turn down. Thanks for everything you've done for me. Bye. And I walked out the factory. Took my uniform off and I handed it back to them. And I embarked upon a new life. 2 weeks later, I went into law enforcement. And I had 23 years in that profession, which offered many opportunities to me, which I would not have had previously. It's not the best job in the world, working in law enforcement. I wouldn't recommend it to any young fella today. Hope you can aim a little higher than that. But for me, it was an opportunity to continue my life in a direction which I was pleased to take. And it taught me a few lessons, absolutely. It taught me a few lessons. It was a very valuable period in my self-development as a human being. Firstly, it made me realise that nobody is really high and mighty. I was having a marvellous life, living like a lord over there in Belgium. And within a short period of time, I was sat on a night shift in a factory, crying my eyes out, suffering with depression because my highly strung plans had all gone to crap. And it was not a happy experience, but it made me remember, nobody is above the hand of fate. You never know what's going to happen. So being prepared for the unexpected is actually a good idea. The other thing it taught me was when I was in that slump, when I was in that trough of my life, even as a young guy in my 27th year, probably, I was somewhat more experienced than probably most 27-year-olds because I'd been in the military for 10 years, lived quite a life, but I still had to pull myself together. I still, when I was in that slump, had to choose to do something about it. I realised there's no cavalry coming over the hill. The only saviour to my life was going to be me. And I did become proactive. I got off my arse. I went looking for something better. I got something better. And destiny itself intervened when the job which I wanted all along actually came calling at short notice. And again, I guess there was a bit of courage involved there. I took that opportunity. I said, no, I can take it. I'll be there in 2 weeks, whatever happens. I learned some things. I allowed myself to wallow a bit, if I'm looking back on it now, to wallow in the grief of the life I had left behind. I did, for a number of months, spend a lot of time walking around like a zombie, thinking, what have I done? I left behind this amazing life, and now I've got this crummy job. What have I done? Can I go back and do it again? And I knew that wasn't really on the cards. And in a way, that was part of the grieving process for the life I'd lived and the new one which was to come. But I put my head down, I got on with it, and I created a new and happy life for me. And in some ways, where there's actionable information here for you, I would say, acknowledge if you're not happy in the life that you're living. Be it the job that you're in, if you're not happy with it, if you are counting down the hours to the end of each day, or the number of days in each week until the weekend, or the number of years you've got left until you retire, acknowledge that to yourself and say, is this the best that I can find for my own life? Is there something out there which would bring me more enjoyment? Yes, you do have to have courage and bravery, and sometimes it's hard, particularly if you're financially beholden to a life that you're living, if you've people to support sometimes. But there's often a way around it. You can educate your way out of a hole by going to night classes, college or whatever, gain greater skills in the field that you're in now to seek promotion into better roles, or change industry altogether like I did. I left the military, went into the emergency services. It was the right path for me, and it led to a far better life in the long run. But it starts with acknowledging that where you are now is not where you want to be in the future. I think of those guys I sat in the restroom with in the factory, and some of those guys had worked there for 30 or 40 years, and it was a soul-destroying, repetitive job which offered no personal challenge or interest, but had a steady weekly wage. Many of those guys were satisfied with that, but some of them I knew weren't. But they didn't, or they weren't proactive about seeking other opportunities. And you have to. And this is another actionable point. You've got to go out of your way to be proactive. You have got to bite down on it and find those other opportunities out there, because those opportunities are not going to come and find you. You are the architect of your success in life. Don't ever look at somebody who's done well and say, well, they just got lucky. Gentlemen, let me tell you something. You make your own luck in this world. You make your own luck, and it's down to you to do so. I could still be working in that factory now. I'm 54, about to be 55. I could still have a few years left ahead of me before I could retire on a crappy little pension and spend the rest of my life, thinking what life I could have lived, the places I could have gone, the people I could have met, the challenges I could have faced and overcome as a human being. That could have been me. But I chose for it not to be, and you can choose too, to make the remaining years ahead of you a more interesting and fulfilling place. Even if you're 75, there are still years ahead of you that you can do something constructive by mentoring other people, by volunteering, by using your experience, enthusiasm and knowledge to improve the lives of the next generation. There is no point in this life where you are not a valuable asset to other people. So whatever stage you're at, think about, if you're not satisfied with where you are, think about how you can make it better for you in the remaining time that we have, because it'll slip by. And when you're on your deathbed, the last thing I want you to do is be filled with regret about what could have been, because now is the opportunity to facilitate change. That's enough from me. I think I've said enough today. So there we go, folks. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, give the video a thumbs up. Subscribe for more. If you'd like to support the channel, of course, you could buy me a coffee, one-off thing, or for a tiny monthly fee of £3 you can become a part of my Patreon community. You'll get at least one, if not 2 or 3 extra videos per week from me, as well as a personal dialogue with me, should you wish to have one. And you will find the links to my Patreon pages in the show notes below. And don't forget, you too can ask me a question, tap into my life journey, and I'd be delighted to answer it in a format, philosophical as it may be, just like this. Leave the questions in the comments section or drop me an email. I'm the only person who reads those emails, so you'll get no judgment from me, whatever your question may be. So, until the next time, be proactive about the life which you're living. Grasp each day, squeeze it for every millimetre of life that you can get. And I'll see you again very soon.